Well, hello everyone. Welcome, friends. My name is Enton Eller. I'm helping facilitate this broadcast from Ambler, Pennsylvania in the U.S., and I'll be providing technical support for our session today, along with Stan Duick. And we're glad to welcome Sean Hancock with us as presenter, but before we begin, let me share a few housekeeping items. As you can see in the chat window up on your upper left, that's where you'll be able to ask questions and make comments and share with Sean and participate in the conversation. And if you have technical concerns, let me know there as well, and I'll be glad to get back to you. Also, you note that in the middle above my head is a list of upcoming webcasts, and we invite you to scroll through that list and see all that we have in store for you. And for those of you from the Church of the Brethren that wish to receive continuing education units for participating live in today's webcast, I'll share those instructions at the end of our webcast for you. Without further ado, let me introduce Stan Duick, Director for Transforming Practices in the Church of the Brethren. And Stan, I'll allow you to introduce the webinar today. Thanks, Stan.
Thank you, Anton. It's great to have everyone here with us today, and we welcome you to the webinar from wherever you are joining us today. It's a privilege to introduce to you Sean Hancock, and Sean comes to us from Bristol Baptist College as part of the Center for Family and Childhood Study. Sean has a deep sense of calling to see children develop in their own spirituality and faith journey, which is why she is passionate about godly play. Sean is a ward leader for the Institute for Children, Youth, and Mission, based at Bristol Baptist College. She is a course leader for Children and Family Ministries, and she also facilitates the Center for Family and Childhood Studies. Her research is on children's play, a spiritual dialogue. And so it is with great delight to have Sean with us today and to have her present to us on families, households, and tribes. Sean, welcome.
Thank you, Stan. And it's good to be with you this evening. As you've heard, I'm the Director of the Centre for Family and Childhood Studies at Bristol Baptist College, and we're facilitating this series of seminars around the theme of family matters. And we hope that over the months, as we explore sort of the characteristics, the qualities and the values of family, why is family important will be one of the questions that we're seeking to answer. What influences and concerns do families face? What has the church got to play in this and in supporting family? What's their role? So the series will examine aspects of faith and life that impact upon family life. But there's going to be some golden threads that are interwoven between each of the different presentations. So each will stand alone, but it will be great if you're able to join us for the whole series of 6. But if not, they will be available online so that you can access them again after the live streaming. Our presenters are offering a whole range of experience and traditions, and it will be good to see how that helps shape our journey as we go together. But they're all united by their passion for supporting children and their families through the work that they do, and each will sort of introduce that as they host their own sessions and presentations. So, as you've heard and as you know, tonight we're looking at families, households and tribes. And hopefully this evening gives us an overview of how the series is going to develop. So I'll start with the question of what is family? Family's messy, isn't it? I don't think that's just my experience. There's all kinds of dynamics that are going on. I'm a mother, but I'm also a daughter and a sister, auntie, niece and cousin. Family is our first experience of our sense of community. So I've got some thoughts around that we can look at and read as Jean Vanier writes about community. I'll just give you a moment to read what he says. All newborns flourish when they experience a safe and a caring world with people around them that they can trust and rely on. So for some, it may seem like this fairy tale land that they've arrived in, this kingdom that they're becoming a part of. And how people respond to them helps them to find their sense of place in this. And that might not seem so bad if the child is treated with respect and care as princes and princesses, but sadly we know that the reality for many is that this isn't actually so. So as we look around and we see the experience of children growing up in this 21st century, what is it that we see that is needed? In our contemporary context, there are many different models of family. We have step and blended families, nuclear and extended families. There's the foster, adopted families. There's those that are lone and single parents. And that's just a few of the terms that we use these days. Families may include stepchildren, children living with each birth parent but at different times, or a child or children in a one-parent family. Some children live in extended families with several generations sharing a home. It's possible now for same-sex couples to adopt, or for one to go through artificial insemination, or for surrogacy. Family life is complex, and we're seeing that there's no one benchmark for it. So I wonder, when you think of a family, who do you recognise as being present in it? It might be your own family that you think of, it might be another one that you're aware of. What are the relationships in that family? Who's holding what role? And what are the other roles that you might like to add into that as well? There's a popular phrase on that often appears on fridge magnets. You may have seen it. It says, "Friends are the family that we choose for ourselves." And this can be particularly true for teenagers, perhaps in their struggle for some autonomy and their personal sense of identity. The peer group becomes hugely influential to them during adolescence. But it can be equally true for the growing number of single people in our communities as they seek to share life, pragmatically because it makes economic sense, but also socially and emotionally, to journey with others and to be family together. So thinking about some of the issues or the points that the quotes have raised for us, so if we stop to think of a family, there is no benchmark model for us. Family is many things to many people, and yet it's also fundamentally part of our deepest yearning as humans to be in communion or a relationship with others. And family is, at its basic level, an expression of relationship. For children and young people growing up, the family is still considered to be the ideal place for care and attention and protection. It's their world, it's their kingdom. Now, these complexities aren't simply a sign of the times or a modern day phenomena. Sometimes we look at family through rose-coloured glasses and forget that even when we go back to the Bible itself, we see that historically family has been complex, but God has continued to bless and work through these complex relationships to make his purpose known. I wonder how often we think of our family as God's gift to us and us to them. There might be days when perhaps it feels far from that. But the Abrahamic faith was passed on domestically in the home. The Jewish household marked the traditions, and the liturgical life was practiced within the home or the tent, as well as within the synagogue. So the idea of the family altar, or having a special place within the home for worship and prayer, particularly around the meal table, is something that we're seeing sought after again through movements like Faith in the Home. And we'll hear some more about that in future sessions. But it's being sought after because there's a sense of we've lost it. It's eroded over time. Now, it could be argued that the examples of family, households and tribes in the biblical story gives no clear pattern. It's clearly positive in terms of what we would understand as healthy, supportive, caring environments. But it's a strange mixed bag. From the first family of Adam and Eve, where Cain murders his brother, to the sibling rivalry of Jacob's children founded on his favouritism and choosing constantly to love some more than others. Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and the sons of Abraham. Here we see the beginnings of this racial and religious rivalry that's still plaguing the world with fear and prejudice today. In fact, sibling rivalry seems written into the script for so many of those Old Testament families. We see sons fall in love with their father's wives. Uncles trick their nephews into marrying the wrong daughter. Sons trick their fathers or try to overthrow them and seize their kingdoms. Wives battle to push their sons into the limelight, and daughters are bargained with, abused and punished. There's infidelity and adultery and murder to cover it up when we read about David and Bathsheba. There's the ambiguity of close friendships, David and Jonathan. We see families leaving their homelands as refugees seeking asylum. Miriam and Moses, for example, Mary and Joseph even, and then there's Ruth and Naomi. It's actually quite difficult as we look at these different families to see that there is one happy model, one happy tribe. There's just lots about the hardship of life and the tough decisions that are being made as a consequence, and the complexities of their relationships as they journey through life together. Yet there are also stories about extended households journeying together, and all generations present a human caravan or tribe, sharing the struggles and the challenges of the desert, travelling hopefully to seek a promised land that's developing community, identity and rules as they go. And the Israelites are a great example of this for us. Or there's the travelling to register for a census whilst pregnant, as Mary and Joseph did. And then there's what about the disciples with Jesus at the Passover, sharing the special meal and the ritual, in the looking out for one another and the sharing of the experience with those around them. That's the family, the household, and the tribe identity. So we can see that there are positive images of caring and commitment and faithfulness to promises that arise from these stories that we can still draw on and which help us to reflect on the nature of family, both good and difficult. Model of the early church where people gathered together in their homes, eating and praying. Their possessions is yet another challenging model of family and household, sharing the nurture of faith beyond the immediate family. Yet to go a little deeper perhaps into one particular yet key family, we're in the Advent season, so it's natural to ponder on the courageous young single mother facing the stigma and the scandal of her village to carry the Christ child. And the older man alongside her, whose hopes of building family together are challenged as he loyally stands beside her to co-parent his stepchild, protecting both mother and child as they flee for safety from their homeland as refugees. We know he passed on the family trade to his stepson, and this family grows, and there are other siblings that are born and change the dynamic in the home. And responsibilities as the eldest son will be sometimes fulfilled, and other times when the family is mostly given second place, and that can make them, well, that did make them mad and worried at different times. But we see this family as they journey with other families and the village to celebrate some of the key festivals. And through them we meet new families, Mary, Martha and Lazarus, who open up their home to offer hospitality to Jesus and others, sharing their home and their belongings. So I wonder now, actually, how your church and your family group express family together. What does that mean as you journey together? And perhaps, Dan, at this point, it might be good to kind of hear from other people in terms of what they're thinking regarding this.
It always helps to unmute the mic. Well, when you were talking about family roles, some people wrote, or one person wrote, in my family, I am the clown as well as the mum. One person also connected with loner. And I know that our roles can change as well in the family. And I'm curious then too, what kind of dynamics might that mean for a family as those roles change in those family dynamics? One being perhaps moving from the clown to perhaps the caretaker. What kind of dynamics does that mean for the congregation? Or mean for a family?
For the family, I think sometimes it can be quite a bumpy road, can't it, as those roles change? I think sometimes we're surprised by the way people, especially those people around us that we know, what we think we know so well, and are so integral to the sense of well-being and the ambience within a family home. When those roles shift and change, the dynamic changes, and can be quite off-putting to those around when you expect people to react in a particular way and they react differently. I think it's quite a challenge actually as well, sort of being within a family when there is a sense of an expectation of the role that you hold, and that's not always one that perhaps fits comfortably for you. I don't know if that's what other people's experience might be.
We starting to get some comments. Sam writes in terms of the question of how does your congregation or gathered group express family? Sam shares, playing together is important. Fun and laughter helps us get through the tougher times. Anita shares, in our church, we experience family best when we eat together. And like a family, it doesn't always go smoothly. Enton, our local congregation where I participate, really cares for each other. We serve as a family that way. Jennifer, I don't think our church expresses family. I think our model is club, not family. And then Lucy shares sharing, eating together, and spending time with each other. Jane, for me, it's important to include all people of all ages and backgrounds, those who are single, childless, divorced, and widowed. And oftentimes we can overlook people in our gathered groups or congregations for those reasons. Another thing that seems to have an impact is the mobility of people and how that has had an impact on the quality of family, either children or grandchildren moving away, perhaps employment changes the impact as to how families interact, and also it has an impact on church. What are some of the things that you're witnessing or experiencing as with those kinds of dynamics?
I think it's really hard for families in today's society when people are so much more transient than they ever used to be. So you don't have the support of the extended family around, as people do move around so much more now. I think as well, losing the consistency of the if it's about people of faith going to church on a regular basis, when we see that actually our time is being stretched in so many different directions, it's hard for people to really find their place within that gathered community as well. So I'm really sorry. I hope you can't hear my dog howling. Right. It is a sense that actually it's another challenge, and I think when we're able to invest the time to actually gather around the table, whether that's playing a game or eating a meal together, when we can see the value of the different generations and the different family models coming together, I think that's really important, and that enriches life together. We learn so much from one another, but I think that's a much more natural way of how we're meant to relate as well. And sometimes we see that happen in our workplaces. You know, other forms of community often mirror some of that, those family interactions and exchanges, and some of the support network that we get through that. So we're kind of going to move into looking a bit more specifically at that. If you're ready to move on,
we'll Sue's comment. She says, in our church, we accept each other for who we are. We also eat together and have fun times together. So thanks everyone for sharing, and we'll get back to Sian, and so she can continue with her presentation.
Okay, so there's a well-quoted African proverb that says it takes a healthy village to raise a child. And this idea of the village reminds us that family is greater than just blood ties. It was never meant to be just down to those living within a fixed geographical home. Certainly the biblical families that we have already mentioned kind of allude to this, but there is this wider communal responsibility that includes those living around the child in the neighbourhood, the wider community, the groups to which that child belongs. It's a community responsibility to protect children and young people and to help prepare them for the wider world, so that they're empowered to release and to reach their potential both now and into the future. For example, the school community, or perhaps the way child protection is legislated for through the local council. A well-functioning family is surrounded by wider support structures and relationships, and this means that a child's not an island cut off and isolated. Instead, their family, whatever that might look like, needs to be considered, needs to be involved and supported for the child to be understood and for them to have all the opportunities for a holistic development. So this village community should be proactive in its welcome to convey a sense of belonging to the family. Its guidance should help inform and affirm parent carers. It's sharing and listening that enables personal stories to be told, and the wisdom of experience to mentor those that live alongside. The stickability of faith, we're told, is dependent on at least 5 significant individuals journeying with and discipling a person. It's a shared collaboration. So perhaps the way we view the family and household is more public than perhaps it's ever been. Or maybe it's just more transparent than in perhaps previous generations because of the way media and social interaction takes place. It could be argued, maybe more negatively, that it's also more invasive and by its interference subverts some parental responsibility. But let's consider family life through a sociological lens to identify what matters to families, and then what and why do families matter to society. So the smallest unit of society is the family, and that unit has the most responsibility. So families in society that may be breaking down, families are more complicated than the simple two-parent nuclear family in northern countries that we might have in mind. Even the most complicated family structure can still be a functioning family, but they must feel accepted and loved so that they themselves can effectively function and then reach out to others. A bit like the tip of an iceberg, I think. Society has seen, and we hear about this emergence of diverse family models, coping with their life situations, and sometimes more successfully perhaps than others. But beneath the surface, there's this range of factors that impact all families, whatever social class they represent. Over time, and with the sustained impact of these factors on the foundations of family life, we're seeing that shift, and the result on society then may seem to be like that rise in the sea levels as the ice cap melts. Health, education, housing, relationships, finances and leisure are the key areas that families are conscious of. And for those with a faith, we might want to add in faith too, and the discipleship of their children as well. These are the physical, the spiritual and emotional issues that matter most to them. But there are also some key institutional pillars of society, and in these postmodern times, these institutions that we're seeing crumbling, showing their age and their limitations in their model, struggling to function with so much change, but society is still structured around them. This family systems theory, I was recently had that described to me as like a child's mobile, and if you pull on one of the objects hanging down from the mobile, actually it changes the dynamics of everything else, and the balance and equilibrium that was there, suddenly everything's jostled around and bobbing up and down. But that family systems theory can help us to understand better from a child-centered perspective, the way that actually where there are shifts in these foundations and in these pillars of society, the impact that that can have upon the individual. So we have here a model by Uri Bronfenbrenner, who has developed this ecological systems theory to explain how everything in a child and their child's environment actually affects the way the child develops and grows. So he labelled different aspects or levels of the environment that influence children's development. And there's this variety of structures that have this rippling effect upon the child. The closer the structure is, to the child, the greater the effect it will have. So, for example, a family is closest in terms of part of the microsystem that the child has. So when the family is experiencing trauma or a crisis, then obviously the child is going to feel that very deeply. We then have the immediate community or the neighbourhood in this next mesosystem. And then when that, for example, perhaps is faced with antisocial behaviour in a local community that might intimidate or breed fear, then one of the impacts may be that children are kept indoors for safety, which again, the child is experiencing, albeit differently from perhaps other children, their peers, who might be living in a safer environment and able to get outside and enjoy the wider environment. The exosystem, or the institutional backbone community, includes the services like education, health, social care, and they exert an authority over the child's life and their family. And then there's this other level, the macro system of the political and the social structures, which, when there's a time of austerity, as we've all been impacted by of late, benefit payments might be something that is impacted by that, or services are reduced or no longer available because perhaps criteria have changed. All of this will ultimately filter through as ways that impact upon the child at the centre and the way the child grows and develops, but also the quality of family life within that home. The Children's Society have done some work on the good childhood and valuing children in today's society, and they highlight 3 lifestyle untruths that children and young people are confronted with, which in turn can impact family life. So they talk about excessive consumerism. To be happy, you have to be wealthy and beautiful. There's excessive aggression, conflict and violence are the norm in human relationships. And there's the unhealthy living, the eating and drinking and smoking to the excess and seeing that as normal, as is spending long periods of time inactive. All of this is a sort of negative drip feed that comes through and impacts the way people are living their lives, which ultimately impacts upon family life itself. So if we move on to look at then how after the Second World War, the psychologist Abraham Maslow identified 5 basic needs that motivate people to cope and survive with some of these challenges in life. Maslow would argue that when these basic needs are deficient, it motivates a survival instinct within an individual to overcome the deficiency at whatever length. By the 1970s, this was extended to 8 elements, keeping the first 4 as they were, so the physiological, safety, belonging and love and esteem needs as they were, but then also adding on to that then by adding in what Maslow called its higher order needs that promoted growth and a sense of well-being through meeting cognitive needs and the aesthetic need for order and symmetry. And then beyond this, that self-actualization, the ability to be who you are and to fulfill personal potential, topped off with the ability then to for transcendence, to transcend personal needs in order to seek the greater good for others and to ensure that their needs, even beyond the very basic, are being met, and in doing so to continue sort of human flourishing. When we look at Maslow's paradigm, we can see where this resonates perhaps with some of the concerns and challenges that families face, the everyday things that matter to them. For example, having a place or shelter to call home that's clean and furnished, damp-free, or even having safe accommodation with a bed for each person. Whether or not they can afford to put food on the table and heat the home, which takes priority, heating or eating. This may be compounded by payday loans and the pressure or lived threat to repay creditors. Employment is a massive influence, and when employment is rewarded with a living wage, there are now fewer children living within workless households, but low-income families who are on chronic low wages, spending long hours, some working 2 jobs perhaps, or even more, away from their children, but still they can't even work their way out of poverty. That's just soul-destroying. Youth transitions into the world of work need support, as they've been disproportionately impacted by the recession and austerity measures. Education that achieves the basics in literacy and numeracy, a system that works with parents to ensure that all children are ready for school by the time they start it, and to work towards closing the attainment gap between poorer and better off children. Within all of this, respecting and valuing family and parenting, which is the greatest influence on the child, by encouraging communication, reading, caring and playing skills of parents in their interaction with their children. So we can see some of these aspirations. I'm sorry, but it looks like my presentation for mum. That's it. It looks like here we can see some of these aspirations linking with the findings from a recent report by the UK Social Mobility and Child Poverty Commission. This is an advisory public body established under the Child Poverty Act of 2010, and they reported last month, and these are some of the statistics that they're offering and presenting in their report. And they say we come to this conclusion because the economy has bounced back strongly. Whilst the economy has bounced back strongly, there are record numbers of people on work. Promising school and welfare reforms are underway. The economic recovery is not being matched by a social recovery. There's 600,000 more children in absolute poverty after housing costs than in 2010. And for families in the middle, those on the average earnings, it will be at least till 2018 before their wages are back to where they were before the recession. The gap between those who have and those who haven't is growing, and between the young and old, north and south, rich and poor, it'd be tempting to think that this is not the case, and that there is social recovery around the corner. But as we can see, it's a huge challenge still facing us here in the UK, but generally across Europe, as this time of austerity continues to have its impact upon people and upon society. I'm just going to skip back a couple of slides because I wanted to read this poem. Gabriella Mistral kind of highlights, it's a really stark reminder that whilst the family doesn't run out and children grow up, so is the time to support and enrich family life. We need to inform and influence the next generation of parents. And we only have a small window in which to do that. So she writes, we're guilty of many errors and many faults, but our worst crime is abandoning the children, neglecting the fountain of life. Many things can wait, children cannot. Right now their bones are being formed, their blood is being made, and their senses are being developed. To them we cannot answer tomorrow. Their name is today. And it is a stark reminder that that small window of opportunity, generations are needing that support and they're needing it now. So what can be done about that? Well, recognising the impact legislation has upon stable families, parenting and caring duties, it's been really interesting that only in October this year, the British government has agreed to measure all its policies and laws against a set of questions to see what impact they would have upon family, as in their policies and their legislation. If we take a look at this, they call it the family test, and these are the questions that they're wanting to kind of measure proposals of policy and legislation against. So identifying what will be the impact that it has on the formation of the family, in terms of the transitions that families face, and some of those life situations and the crises that people have to live with as well or through. How will that support them, or is that going to be an added hardship to them? In terms of all members of the family and enabling and empowering them to fulfill their roles within family life, in terms of developing and supporting parenting and the caring responsibilities. How will policies help support that? We've got about the families and the way that policies can impact both sort of when there is a marital family, but then also what happens when that falls apart. Does that have another impact? Are they dealt a further blow from that? And actually, those who are most at risk in our society, you know, and within that, when we think about the growing number of single people within our communities as well, is there are they paying a penalty for for being single, because everything is geared up to share the expenses and the costs? Um, how does this impact upon all members within our society? And what will be a way of supporting and ensuring that actually this is a positive recognition of the importance of recognising family needs, and not overlooking that? Where will it reinforce this and place this at the heart of society? So we could say this is quite a positive move, quite forward thinking perhaps. Um, and that could be good. And without getting too political, it could also be argued perhaps that really this should be at the heart of any responsible government anyway, and really, they ought to be thinking this through and should have been doing this before. Big questions, and quite a lot of information within all of that. So as we kind of think this through together, I wonder, out of that, how you think society can support our families. What other questions, I wonder, has this raised for you? What are your reflections? And for those who are from other countries, actually, what are you noticing from your culture as well? Is this something that you're seeing and able to relate to, or is there another dimension? Are you further on in this journey than perhaps we are here in the UK? So, Dan, if it's okay, it'd be a good time now, I think, at this point to kind of bring out some of those
Well, this
questions.
is very good. And Anita has responded. We started the question, what are you noticing about families in your community based on the comments that you're making? And Anita shares, our local head teacher reports how so many children are not in a state where they can learn when they come to school because of the trauma they experience at
Mm,
home, the unhealthy family relationships, conflict, and family breakdown. Julie is in agreement with this, and she says the need for pastoral care in our schools is massive. And Enton then shared a
mm,
question: how do you think society can support the family? And we got some good dialogue going on. The introduction form before after school care has been so important for many, including the provision of food, run, and relationships. The one thing that does come to mind is that sometimes the policies are in place, the resources in place, but they're not delivered in a way that allows families to access them. For example, a
mm,
single mother who may be working, who needs some kind of support. That means taking off from work, finding transportation. In some of those other dynamics that contribute to families not always receiving the kind of support that they need. And perhaps these are places where the church needs to rethink in ways that we connect to families as well, in the way that we can provide support.
mm,
Um, let's see. Enton has noticed that several school meal programs here have started because of children cannot learn simply because they are too hungry. Um, Jane, sorry, the introduction before and after. She could say more. And then Maslow's hierarchy is something that has brought up some comments as well. So you've flipped a switch there, Sean, in creating some comments. And would you like to, some of the comments that we've read, would you like to respond to some of them, especially, with children not coming to school and really not being in a place to study and to
mm,
learn because of all the trauma, the physical needs, uh, that are there.
sure. Yeah, and you mentioned sort of the need for pastoral care in our schools, and certainly locally here in Bristol, we're seeing a growing number of chaplaincy teams both within secondary and primary schools, who are doing some amazing family intervention work and support work. And some of that has included sort of the breakfast clubs at the beginning of the day. So children will arrive early and they will receive a meal at school, so that actually they've got that, those hunger pains actually being dealt with before going into the classroom. Totally agree. I was a primary school teacher before going to the college, and all teachers know that actually until children are in that emotional place that's ready for learning, and that emotional sense of well-being may be about having a stomach that isn't empty because you haven't had breakfast or a healthy meal at the end of the day. It can be because of the what a family might be living through and a crisis. So that plays on children's minds, and you can see some who are, they're present, but they're not present in that sense that actually emotionally they're elsewhere because they're troubled and they're trying to work through some of the things that they might be witnessing or some of the things they might be experiencing within their home settings. So vitally important work to be done in terms of pastorally supporting both children and young people. And as I say, we're here locally seeing that growth of the movement of chaplains, and I'd be interested to hear what other people are seeing of that. I think also the kind of programs that that are accessible, that kind of help bring families together, is really important. So I'm really interested to hear of what churches might be doing in terms of working with both their local schools, but perhaps their local family centres, children's centres, other service providers in their area. Sometimes we can, as well-meaning as we might be in our worshipping communities, we can kind of keep ourselves quite distinct from some of the other people working within our local community. And now as ever, it's really important that we're kind of joining together, not working in isolation, but trying to actually support one another in the services that we're providing, and really uniting in the way that we're seeking to bring about transformation in our communities, and really impacting and enriching the way people are able to live within those communities. So I'd be really interested to hear if people are aware of things that are going on for them through their local church, hooking up with and connecting with perhaps their local schools or other providers in their areas. I think, is that, sorry, I forgot the other part of your questions. Those are the first bits that kind of got my brain going.
Well, we have
there was something about
Jennifer shares, many people live here because London is too expensive in the area where she lives. And so therefore long commutes are happening, and that seems to be happening in a lot of areas. I think a key aspect, Jane writes, is helping them to realize they may still have needs and it's okay to ask for help. That is very important. Julie writes,
removing that stigma, I think.
Adam shares free school meals for all foundations, stage, and KS1 children introduced in September ensures they have a hot, healthy meal. Julie writes, I believe chaplaincy in school is a real way forward and is being so greatly appreciated in our local schools here in a very rural setting where families face all the pressures of modern day life without easy access to support. And I know, like the church where I'm at, in terms of my membership, we have really gotten involved in our community because 50% of the kids qualify for subsidy school meal, and 10% of the kids in our school district are homeless, which shocks a lot of people in our church because it's considered to be a fairly affluent community. And so oftentimes poverty and issues are hidden from us, or we don't necessarily see them. Allison writes, we work closely with a local health visitor, and she visits our baby and mother groups and organizes gift bags of clothes and so forth. So it looks like there's some groups that are really getting involved with the schools and through their through community projects. Well,
yeah, that's
tell you
really
what, we have a few
encouraging.
minutes left, so I'm going to pull away so you can finish your presentation and your thoughts and with us.
Okay, thank you. There's been lots of food for thought in what we've begun to sort of scratch the surface of, really. And from here on, we're going to, over the next few sessions as well, kind of continue this conversation. So we are going to look more at actually what does it mean to have faith in our home? How can we nurture that? How can we pass on faith from one generation to another? That bringing together the generations, there is so much more work to be done on that in the sense of how we can make that much more accessible and inclusive, but meaningful for each member of the generation as well in that way. I think it's about ensuring that we kind of continue to think through what's happening. How much we know about our community is really vital, because that helps us to recognise actually what's already happening, what's being done, and where are the gaps and where is the need still. Reducing and trying to remove some of the stigma that goes around that prevents people from crossing the threshold and asking for help. How do we help in that way? How are we able to actually go out and meet people in their place of need and work with them from there? How can we build positive working relationships with others within our communities that help to really address some of these social issues and seek to support some of the practical challenges of life in today's society? How can we help draw in those who feel on the fringe, who are uncomfortable or find just the very term family difficult and quite a loaded term to be used? What can we do to reach out and to help help them feel their place within all of this? And in particular, I think of that in terms of those who may be single, who may be alone, who may be childless couples, recognising actually the part that they contribute and bring to the wider family model as well. So we'll continue to kind of look through those things, but I guess my challenge to you is to get out into your community and to see what's this looking like for us here. What are we doing? Who are we working with where we are? That we can continue to develop that and make that meaningful. How are we supporting our local schools? What could we do to go in and to volunteer? And whether that's about hearing a child read, or whether that's about helping serve breakfast with a chaplaincy team, whether it's about pouring coffee at parents' evenings, or even just taking in a tin of cakes for the staff room and just letting the staff team know that actually there are people outside in the community who are grateful for the work that they do and are prayerfully supporting them and want to encourage them in the roles that they play in terms of just working with children and their families in that way. So there's lots that we can continue to work through and to think about. And then over these weeks then, we'll also be beginning to look at some of the other transitional stages within life, some of the other more crisis traumatic moments or rites of passage that families go through, and how best from a church perspective we can help in terms of recognising and marking some of those rites of passage, but also perhaps actually helping accompany people through those experiences. And what does that mean? How do we be fellow pilgrims on the road and journey together? And what is the impact upon our worshipping community when actually we do that and we go that extra mile? And it's not just about Sunday, but it's about the life people are living from Monday through and including Sunday. So we'll continue working through some of those things as well over the next week. But I do thank you for your participation, and if there are any closing questions, Stan.
Sean, let's just take a minute to invite Anton back and share some closing information that can be provided, and as well as we want to put up a couple polls. So Anton, if you'll join us, and Sean, if you'll stick with us here a couple minutes, and those of you that are, we encourage you to continue to share your comments and ideas. And while Anton is coming on, Jane has shared that a good initiative that has been started is called Pray, Bake, and Read. That's just been started in the UK, and perhaps we could hear more about that. And she writes that it's pray for the local schools, bake them a cake, and go to hear children read. What a encouraging process and support for children and families. Anton.
Thank you, Stan, and thank you all for participating as you have today. I've put up 2 short polls that are available for you. If you would just give us your feedback on both, saying how helpful was the presentation, the content, and the learning with Sean. And the second is, how well did you like this webinar format, this online meeting space? I've also provided links for those that wish to request continuing education units. And so, Sean and Stan, I'll turn it right back to you.
Thank you, Anton. Well, I think we're off to a good start, Sean, with this series and what you've introduced, and looking forward to the 5 that will follow over the next few months. And as then Julie also shares, Earn Their Trust as a good program and initiative to be involved. I wonder, you brought up something earlier about the survival mode that people are in because of all these dynamics within our culture and society. Are we in such a survival mode personally and as families that we're unable to really function at a higher, almost at a higher level? And it's not so much, and it's almost like we could be in danger of forgetting how to function as healthy families or healthy family units. Does that make sense? You know, where you get into this pattern or habit. My wife is in, and I'll just share an example of this. My wife is in the mental health field, and she specializes with children and adolescents. And she's worked for the same psychiatric hospital for 20 some years. And she is seeing now the grandchildren of people that she saw when she first started. And there's these larger family systems where the behaviors, the situations keep repeating themselves, almost as if they stay in a mode of survival and can never break out of that. What might we do as a church to help community to help break through some of these situations or circumstances that we're seeing in our communities?
Oh, that's a big question.
I thought I'd throw one out.
It's a really important one, because I think, you know, we are imitators, aren't we? So we see how people, you know, as children, we learn from those who are around us, and we imitate what we see in terms of behaviours presented to us. So it's very easy for getting into a cycle of behaving and responding in particular ways. So there's a need for a change of mindset, which I think is part of what you're saying, in terms of breaking these cycles. And I think that's where actually that journeying together is really important, because that sense of actually, if we're true about being family in this wider community, then it's about sharing all aspects of life. And that's not about it, that it's suddenly going to be a perfect model, because it isn't. And, if we're all honest, we all have times that we go through where we mess it up and we find it a real struggle and a real challenge, to greater and lesser degrees. But actually being real about that and actually sharing how we move on from that is really important. So breaking down some of that, we have a saying over here that sort of, that stiff upper lip, that we kind of gird ourselves and we present something, and we can sometimes hide behind a mask that implies that everything's good and everything's okay, and so to others looking on, it can seem like we've got it all sorted. So actually, partly, I think there's starting of us all perhaps letting go of the mask that we hide behind, and being real about ourselves and sharing life, which is making ourselves vulnerable in the same way that we're wanting other people to make themselves vulnerable to us through sharing their life experiences as well. I think presenting a different way of being is really important, and if we can do that as a community, together, and provide opportunities that perhaps deal with some of the life issues. So whether that's about gathering together, and people have already said about sort of gathering round the table and sharing meals together. In some homes there won't be a table to gather round. That's not part of their furnishings. That's not the way that they operate. So actually that's a really massive thing. But if within the community group where we meet, there's an opportunity to kind of do that together, that might be less intimidating than being invited into somebody's home for fear of the expectation that they've got to invite you back into theirs, and it won't be the same. So sometimes it's finding perhaps a third space that is that feels a more neutral ground for people to meet at. Looking at those practical ways. So whether that's about getting involved in some of the whether that's school activities or activities that are running out of the church, but on a much more practical level. So whether that's about having, we've got bread making classes that go on, and cookery clubs that, people take it in turns and they make soup and they share the soup together, or other dishes and things, and actually it's bringing people together. You learn from one another, you're sharing what one another knows, but then you also sort of share the goods from that as well, the riches and the fruit that comes from that time together. Things like that, where people are alongside. It's less confrontational and intimidating to actually journey together. I noticed somebody earlier had said about run, and I don't know if that was about the school run, or I know in my own church we've had a running club, and that's been an opportunity for people to gather on a Saturday morning and jog along and build themselves up from sort of the couch potato type thing to your 5K, and that's been a really good motivator for people in terms of getting fit, in terms of boosting self-esteem. But there's been some really fascinating conversations amongst the group as they've done that together as well. So I think, being creative, but recognising actually what other things people are interested in that will be something that people want to engage in, or what has that practical aspect that is useful and helpful, that enables people to move forward from that. We all learn from one another, is my experience, and so I think that the opportunities to draw people together, and to do something like that, I guess in many ways mirrors what was said earlier about either the coming around the table to eat or the playing games together. It's being able to relax and to laugh, being able to share fellowship, to talk, and maybe that's including worship and prayer together. It's about sharing food and being able to, and food in its widest sense. So sometimes that's about sharing equipment and other things that we have in our lives that actually sometimes other people just need to borrow once in a while. How can we do that?
Yeah.
Going back to that early church model, isn't it, really?
It seems too that it enables us to appreciate the human being that we're engaged with in those, in situations. And oftentimes we stick a lot of labels on people, and we lose that reality that it's just another human being. So another human being created in the image of God. Well, this has been terrific. We want to thank everyone for being here. Sean, thank you for sharing with us today. Are there any closing thoughts that you would like to share as we close out today's webinar?
I'd just like to go back to the poem that I read earlier, and that sense of actually to them we can't answer tomorrow. Their name is today, and that's for the child and the family around them. So let's make the most of each day.
Well, thank you, Sean, for being with us today, sharing some real wonderful insights and with us, and allowing us to think and to ponder about some of these questions, and greatly appreciated. Anton, thank you for your help, your support, and to everyone that has been with us from wherever you are connecting this afternoon or this evening. We appreciate you being here and your support of these webcast events. And we hope that you have a takeaway from this time today that will encourage you in your congregation and community, and find ways in which God is at work in our world, and how we can join in as the instruments of God's peace and reconciling love. Thank you, Sean. Blessings, and great to have you with us. And we hope to have you back again in the future. So look forward to it.